Right. Hello, everybody. So yeah, I will try to show you a bit like what kind of mission we are doing here in ISIS with in partnership with AMSAT. But first of all, I would like to introduce a bit like why the CubeSat are useful for the training programs actually. So as most of you knows, because I think most of you have worked on a CubeSat project already, but it's basically like a tool for active learning. And when you compare active learning results versus like passive learnings, like there's a lot of studies showing actually that active learning are definitely more efficient in terms of knowledge transfer. And especially for system engineering, it's always very important to have an hands-on approach. Like we can have a lot of lessons about system engineering, but the best is just like to do it and to see how it's going on. Also, like the CubeSat actually very compatible with the student profile. So still again, the do-it-yourself philosophy, like it's very liked by the students. And what we can have also with this space mission is like they are small in terms of lifetime of requirement and risk. So it's very compatible with a student timeline project of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And at the end, still, like it can allow to have like a very big picture of the space system. So like in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, you can like feel all of the parts of the space system. So like from the design phase to the integration with the launch and the ground station system and the operation, for instance. And yes, the last one, of course, is like for CubeSat, space is great. Generally, like there is a lot of interest and involvement by students. Because of space, and schools also like this a lot because also it can give a lot of prestige and communication from outside. So about the project we do in ISIS and with AMSAT, it's like mainly like a double educational scope. The first one is like an educational mission outreach, so we support like the STEM activities. So this is like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Basically, you have a satellite with in space, downloading data from space, so like temperatures, magnetic field, and we can give that to the students, and the students can do some application, also like using the Doppler for estimating the velocity of the satellite. And it helped a lot also to foster the awareness and the interest of space science. Like, as you maybe have seen, like, but I think in the coming years there will be a lot more and more space activities going on. And it's very nice, like if we can already train the future engineers of tomorrow with that. And this kind of application actually is very like for a wide range. Can go from elementary schools until the university. And also on the other side, what we try to do is like also to train also like students from master level with space system engineering training. So basically like it's like a 1 year training when like the students actually we create this mission for the educational mission outreach, so they will have like a flight proven platform and concept a system, so like a lot of the elements are already like with a high heritage, and they will like from that they will like a full development cycle develop within a year, and we try to fit actually this development cycle until the flight readiness of the satellite within the school year. So a bit of history. So the first one actually of the satellites was the FunCube-1 satellite. It was an amateur CubeSat developed like in conjointly by AMSAT NL and AMSAT UK. It's totally like volunteer satellite. So this is just guys like they just decided to collect money together, and like because of love of amateur radio and space, they decided to build a satellite. And the purpose of the satellite is like to carry like an outreach material science experiment. So basically there is like a two faces on the satellites with different material, and they have different temperature when they are in the sun or in eclipse, and they try to explain to the students how does it work with this data. And the second thing is like also the satellite like as an UHF, VHF transponder payload on board. Particularity of this 1 year CubeSat mission is like it's the first satellite with a mission for education. So like as a first mission actually, so this has never been done before, like just having a satellite dedicated for that. And it's also like a first CubeSat 1 year with a linear transponder. So like it's also allowing a lot of new mission with that for the amateur radio community. And how about our involvement as ISIS? So we help in this mission with providing some hardware, making the system integration of the satellite, and also like through our other company ISL to provide the launch. About this mission, actually, it's still going well. So now it has been launched since almost 4 years, and it's still going strong. Actually, you can still like see the signal from the satellite on some website on internet. Also, the big particularity of this amateur radio mission is like amateur, they are like worldwide spreaded, and you can have like access download of the satellite almost like 99% of the time. So like in 4 years, it's around like 1.2 gigabyte of data from more than 1,000 data providers. So if you want to have a look, I put some website as a reference for the satellite, and also like if some of you like are interested with this kind of STM activities, like how to do some education outreach, you can have a look about all the different possible applications from this satellite. And manuals are available like English, French, Spanish, and Italian. And the next one, so this one has been launched recently in February in the big PSLV launch. This is Naive, name EO88. So 88, it's quite actually in radio amateur, it's mean love and kisses. So they were very happy to have this name actually for this satellite. So at the beginning, it was a program initiated by the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center. So it's like a space agency in Dubai. When I don't know if you have heard of that, but they are trying to have a mission to go to Mars like in 2021. And they really want to train more and more like space engineer over there. So they use this kind of mission like to try to develop more the space engineer education program. The goal of this satellite is like was also like still double. So first like train some students that are going to be space engineer. Now they are actually space engineer in this space agency. So we train them like from scratch to the operation. And then we went to also now they will start this year actually to use the satellite as an educational outreach. So basically they have a team of engineers that are going to go to the schools and use the data from the satellite to explain how does it work space and to foster the interest of space. About this satellite, so the particularity is like the first UAE CubeSat mission, so they haven't also done bigger satellites, but now it's the first one. They have also started, I think, like 6 of them, something like this in the UAE, like so a lot of universities are following that now. And also it's like for 1U, like particularities like we have implemented like an active tumbling control in the satellite, which is automated. So like the satellite controls its spin rates automatically by itself. And our involvement for this mission was full, so we did like almost everything, also with the apps and the support of AMSAT. But so we did the hardware, like we provide the hardware, we help in the software development. We did the system integration, provide the launch, and also like during the operation, we provide some support. About the space system engineering training, so like to provide like a quick overview. So basically like what we start to do is like we have some general system engineering courses with like the University of TU Delft, when some like former teacher help us to provide some system engineering training. Then we do some design phase, so like as I've seen like from the previous presentation, the normal one with the formal milestone reviews. So mission definition with the requirement, feasibility analysis, some system budget, trade-off, for instance about the power consumption and the use of the automatic system control. Yes, also like 3D analysis and environmental analysis for the environment. Then we go to the second step of this training, which is the assembly integration and verification. So first, we don't let the student play already with the FM model. We want to let them to train a bit with an engineering model. So this is the first step. And then we go with hands-on participation in satellite AIT. So from electrical integration to the end-to-end testing. So like we really try to put all the students in this test and to make them like very part of this project. And at the end, we also like make a review of the requirement to make sure that all the requirements we define at the very beginning of the mission are validated and the satellite is ready for flight. And during the operation, we also do the training of the students, and not only the students, also the teachers. They can also have some fun during the satellite operation commissioning. And then we let the students and the teacher team like having a full control of the satellite, and we really like have a little support now for this mission actually. Sorry. And also, like as the same than FunCube-1, like the satellite is a tool for space science awareness and indication. So we have exactly the same functionality than a FunCube-1 for the mission, but also what we decided to put is like an IMTQ board, where it can be used by the student actually to do some attitude determination of the satellite. So they receive the data from space directly, and from that they should be able to see what face of the satellite is pointing where, and then they can really like work on this project to develop new ADCS system and to understand how ADCS system is working in space. Also, like the good things for that is like when you have the attitude of the satellite and you have some temperatures, you can also like play a bit and be like and try to define also some thermal model of the satellite, and then you can really like do some advanced experiment in the satellite, and as well also for the link budget. So again, also for the satellite, like all the data are publicly available. So if you want to have a look at it, you can have you can go like on the following website. There is also like a tools you can download. I will explain like a bit later how does it work to catch the data from the satellite. And a few words also about the collaboration between IMSAT and ISIS. So we try to share tasks as clearly as possible. But basically, like AMSAT, they're responsible of the payload design, so they have the same FunCube payload available on the satellite, and they also the flight software. They also provide all the utilities, the tool on the ground to be able to decode the data from the satellite, and also to send the comment. On our side, what we do is like basically like design the satellite and the hardware with the students, and once again, like satellite AIV testing for testing facilities. With testing facilities, training and tool for design AIV operations. So this is like we provide some tools like to help the student to design their satellite. And at the end also we provide the launch and the ground segment for the satellite. So in our collaboration with AMSAT, what we used to do also in the project is like to have joint milestone review to make sure that everybody is on the same page and we can move forward with the project. And also the thing which is very nice at the end also, we can have like the support of the AMSAT network, so like the worldwide spreaded AMSAT networks, like on volunteering basis. And basically like when you start the mission during the commissioning, for instance, it's very helpful because instead of waiting 2 hours, 3 hours or 4 hours to have the data of the satellite and to see if everything is fine and you just worry during this time, after half an hour, you can get the data from some point in the world, and it makes life easier. So basically, this the last picture actually was the first telemetry data we received from the satellite after the launch, and that was the price for the guys catching the data. So a short overview of the satellite. So yeah, it's not a 12U, 3U, it's just a 1U, simple. We want to really make simple. The goal here is like to make a simple mission to make sure we can manage the timeline and the risk. So it's a CubeSat 1U, like the mass is like 1.122 kilos. Power consumption is around 2 watts, so it depends on which mode in orbit. And we have uplink in UHF and downlink in VHF for the satellite. About the subsystem, so we try to participate to all the subsystem. There is mainly the payload, so this is the CCT board, the RF board, and the PI board, which is done by AMSAT UK but soldered at ISIS. And then we have the classical subsystem of the satellite, so basically an EPS for the power, a structure, the solar panel also for the power, the antenna system for the communication with the ground, and the IGs. So the IGs is kind of the interface board you use like to connect everybody together on the satellite. And of course the IMTQ for the altitude control. So a few things also about the altitude control of the satellite. So what we have seen with the previous mission on the FunCube-1, actually there was a passive altitude control, and it didn't work so well. Sometimes there was some behavior like it was a bit random, and the satellite started to spin up very high, and it was a bit worry for us. So we decided to move to an active altitude control, much more reliable. But the problem is like how to fit such kind of system in a one new CubeSat, because you have very limited power and mass and space. So we try to do different trade-off analysis to see, especially for the power budget, to see if we can fit this kind of subsystem. Actually, with this trade-off analysis, we see like in a worst case, like that can work. Funny part is like when we put the satellite in space, actually it stayed very stable, so we barely use this ADCS control system. So about the concept of operation, so this satellite, yes, so it downloads like permanently data actually, so it's always transmitting data to the ground. You have like the housekeeping of the satellite emitted every 5 seconds, so you can see like every 5 seconds the status of the satellite. And in addition of that, you have also like a set of data which is like the war orbit data. So like when you receive one payload from the satellite, you can see like what happened during the last 96 minutes, every 1 minute. So this is very helpful for the thermal modelization to see what is the behavior of the satellite. And also like for the magnetic control, we provide like a high resolution, high time resolution data like at 1 second. Then you can have a very like attitude estimation of the satellite over one. And this attitude estimation of the satellite, yes, every 1 second, and so you can have very high accuracy data. And also like the other things I haven't talked yet is like also there is in the payloads of the data payload of the satellite, there is some filter messages, so 200 bytes, when it's like basically kind of Twitter of space, like so you can really like send a message to the satellite and it will be re-emitted all over the world. And I hope it will work, but I will try to show you like basically what the satellite signal is. Yes, too much. Okay. So basically this is how do you listen to satellite. So the beep you listen is like the 5 seconds payload data actually, and every 5 seconds you receive this frame from the satellite and you can decode it on your laptop with a single sound card. About the decoding of the satellites, it's very easy actually to receive it. So basically, you just need like a laptop, a FunCube dongle, and a receiving antenna. You connect the dongle to your laptop, then you connect the dongle to an antenna, and everywhere in the world you can receive the satellite. So there was one of our Graham Chauvel, like working at AMSAT UK, I think like on a cruise somewhere in the Arctic. It was like receiving the satellite FunCube. So it's very accessible, like from everywhere in the world. Like also now we could have, if we are in the path of a satellite, we could receive data from the satellite. And then, like when you receive data of the satellite, you can decode it with a set of software provided by AMSAT, and then you can have some nice graph to see like the evolution of the housekeeping of the satellite. On the other hand, so what also we provide is like a ground station to operate the satellite. So this is like what we have provided to Dubai. Basically, this ground station is only for the student, and they can use it to send comment to the satellite. So if they want to reset the satellite, if they want certain data from the satellite, they can do that. That was actually like the nice things for Dubai. We think about maybe putting a ground station here. That would have been a very nice link budget, but unfortunately, no volunteer to go there. That was a bit too high. About the space engineering training, so also like something we really try to focus, because something we see like in all the space system is like actually is the how to catch to stay with the timeline. So this is the timeline we try to have from the system. So kick off in September, and then we try to provide the satellite ready for launch in June. So basically this is the thing we try to stick with, and then we have the launch, and the launch is always like very difficult to guess, so this is not something we can include, because launch are very like not flexible, but they are very moving sometimes a lot. I don't know like if you heard about this Falcon 9 launch, but yeah, it has been delayed since 2 years for some CubeSat satellite. But yeah, of course this timeline and milestone are flexible, and we try to fit with the student calendar. So basically, when we prepare for flight, this is like how we integrate the satellite in the quad pack. So that was like for the PSLV flight. So when we launched like 104 satellites, that's a lot of boxes with a lot of satellites. And this is like the last picture we have of the satellite Naif here. Like, so there is another satellite Al-Farabi pushing us because there was like two satellites, a 2U and a 1U. And Naif was like push out the first, and yeah, this is the last picture. Since then, we don't have any more picture of the satellite. I think you understand why. And just like, so also like about the commissioning, so also something which is, I think we like very lot with the satellite is like, satellite is simple, so the commissioning also is simple. So like in this case, it took 3 days only. It was also like funny to have some rainy days in Dubai, actually, that was a very rare moment. But in 3 days, we will be able to make sure that all the satellite was functional and ready for the mission. So after 3 days, the satellite was ready. And this is the next one, actually, GY1SAT. So this is GY1, it's like the amateur code of the king of Jordania, like the former one, who was like a radio amateur, actually. And his successor decided to make a satellite in his honor. And we're working with them, so also like in a similar program than Naif, actually, and with more functionality. Again, we also try to improve the options on the satellite. So basically, this one will, instead of downloading some data, we also download some pictures. And to conclude, so like about this educational project, so big point for us is like we can make like a full project in a full life cycle training in 1 year or 2, depends of the expectation. But when you can see like the hands-on training on the design and the assembly and the testing, so we really try to put like the students part of this project and to help them to know how do we work with space engineering. We also like use this famous like V-model philosophy. When you define first your requirement, then you go to the subsystem, and then you go back to verify each of your requirements as working correctly. That's very important actually for space industry. And also like what we have like now, we have several satellites flying, several missions already with that, and we can have the advantage of flight proven system. So it's very easy for us now to know how to deal with the deadline and the timelines in the project, and to be very like to fit everything with a student calendar. Of course, also something very important with CubeSat is like what we try to do is like to make it accessible to most of the people. I mean, around the Earth. Like now, if more we can reduce the cost, more we can make it available for a lot of people. So more people can be trained as a space engineer. And of course, the good point also, like as I said before, like what we expect is like there will be a lot of development in space industry like in the coming years. So this tool is very nice for training the next engineer of tomorrow. As also you can access to all the data over the world, and everybody can use this one. That's all. Thank you. That's the price and the project.
Okay, questions? No? No questions. Okay. So then we will move to the next presentation given by Damien Gratatour on mission JPU4 Space from Observatoire de Paris.
Non, c'est pas ça. Yes. Okay. Hello everyone. So this project is maybe a bit different from what you've seen already today and what you will see in the next days, because it's not really a mission. It's more about a technological development we are leading in Paris, trying to assess some high-performance computing technologies for space applications. So I gave you here a number of names of people involved. Mostly they are students who are working in Paris. Unfortunately, I won't be around so much during the workshop. So if you are interested in what we are doing, please contact me with this email address after this session. So what we are doing is about GPUs. So maybe some of you are familiar with this technology. So basically the difference between a CPU and a GPU is that a GPU is almost the same size in terms of chip, but instead of containing few cores, let's say 2 to 8 cores on a CPU, we have thousands of cores inside the GPU, but the clock rate is reduced. Which gives this kind of processor high energy efficiency. So GPUs today, they are no more limited to high performance graphics application, but they can cover a really wide range of application. And in fact, general purpose GPUs are already used a lot in giant data centers in the world, mainly because they have a proven computing efficiency, but also the highest energy efficiency on the market, if I put aside the FPGAs, of course. And if you look at the first 13 computers in the last Green 500 ranking, these 13 first computers are equipped with GPUs. So these chips, these processors are today in the high-performance computing market leading the way because their energy consumption is very low compared to their compute efficiency. So this is for, let's say, general-purpose GPUs, you know, the big boards you can buy to put on your computers. But today, new chips dedicated to embedded applications are hitting the market. And these chips, they mix some CPUs, ARM CPUs and GPUs. And here you have an approximate block diagram of a chip. This is one of the first generations of chip that included both ARM cores and GPUs. And you see that on this chip you add up to 5 ARM cores coupled to 192 GPU cores, everything packed into the same chip. And this kind of products, they address a very wide range of applications, from robotics or even smartphones or tablets to automotive and aeronautics. And so, given the very high energy efficiency of these processors and the fact that these new chips were hitting the market, we decided that it was a good opportunity to assess this kind of technology for space applications. And more opportunities are appearing with these chips, hardware opportunities, so you have RUG systems that can be very useful, watchdogs inside the architecture, so that, you know, if any error happens, it can reboot automatically. And we have also a lot of software opportunities, libraries for data processing, very efficient, and deep learning frameworks that are free and available on this architecture. So what do we do in GPU for space? We try to find the good convergence between these standard GPUs that you can plug through the PCI Express port on your PC to lightweight embedded GPU chips to rugged GPU platforms, and we try to have the same development cycle on all these components so that the software you develop for a GPU on the ground can be reused in a space mission without changing a line of code. So these systems we try to to address. They can be in the ground station for data processing or simulation, but they can be also embedded into the satellite for real-time data processing in flight. So the main goal here is to increase the technology readiness level of this GPU-based computer for space platform, and design and implement dedicated algorithm for these missions or for simulations of these missions. So our project benefits from the support from different partners. We have the LabX ESEP in Paris, where we get rolling funding yearly. We have a partner in Vietnam, USTH, where we got a significant grant 2 years ago, but the project is just starting there because we had some administrative issues. We have also been funded by Universe, and we are trying to get closer to CNES. Last year we tried to get funding through the R&T program, went to phase 2, but we didn't went through, and we will try again this year in collaboration with some colleagues there. So that's for the context. So some project management. So we have these partners, we have a management structure here, and we have basically two different heads, engineering and science, and we try to address a number of aspects for this technology for space. In terms of resources, given the limited amount of funding we get, it's mainly students. So, yes, sorry. In the next slides, I will concentrate on what's happening in France, in Paris, and we'll give you a few slides on what we are starting to do in Vietnam. So in Paris, given the limited amount of funding we have, it's mostly internships that we have in terms of human resources. We have had several students over the past years, but since we have been in this computing subject for quite a long time, we have some significant hardware available in Paris, and I will talk about 2 generations of GPUs that we have been using. The first Jetson boards that were released in 2014, and a more recent generation of board, the Jetson TX2, which has been delivered to the market a few months ago only, and that we have been able to test extensively during the past weeks. We have some test facilities available in Paris for thermal tests. We have a thermal enclosure in the Lesia laboratory in Meudon, and we have also developed a custom test bed for power consumption test under realistic workload. So in terms of result, this is the kind of things we are doing. So we did put the board in the oven to make it ready for vacuum test, and we have used a number of probes on the board itself to measure the temperature evolution during processing. We have removed the fan because, of course, in flight it will be useless. So basically, you are using a processor that dissipates a lot of heat, but you remove any way for this processor to dissipate its heat. So what will happen in a normal processor, if you remove the fan, after a few minutes of using your processor, it will just shut down because it's getting too hot, and you have some watchdogs internally to shut down the processor. And this is exactly what happens when you tune the operational mode to maximum performance. The temperature rises until the processor just shut down. The good surprise was that even with the fan removed, if we tune the processor to work in what is called power save mode, then the temperature remains constant and the processor is adjusting itself in terms of processing power available. So in terms of heat dissipation, it's more or less the same. And so it never shuts down and remains to a temperature very close to the maximum operating temperature. So this is very, very important news. It means that even if we remove any heat dissipation mechanism on the processor, it can still work at reduced performance, but it will not burn. We have also went through temperature cycles to check what happens with this processor when we go up to 80 degrees and down to minus 50 degrees, I think. And the processor follows well the cycle, never shut down because we are in this power save mode. So all in all, you know, the thermal behavior of the processor seems fine to go in flight. So now we are really interested in how much this processor is consuming in terms of power and how far it can be efficient to process data in flight. So we did set up this small bench to measure directly on the chip the power consumption and to check the evolution of this consumption over a full workload. So here you see a GPU board that is connected to some oscilloscope and some power generator, and we can measure in real time what's happening on the chip in terms of power consumption. And the first test we did with the first generation of board was kind of interesting because so these boards, they are equipped with both a CPU and a GPU, and what drains the most of the power is the CPU when it's working, but the GPU remains very stable at a power consumption of only 4 watts, whatever the kind of processing load you put on the processor. So it was very interesting. But really, what drains most of the power on the chip is the CPU. So this was on the first generation of board, and this was in the maximum performance mode. If you switch to the managed performance mode, you see that the CPU is still draining a lot of power, but the workload that is on the GPU is reduced to only 2 watts. So that's very interesting in average. So between 2 and 3 watts in average. So that's very interesting because the workhorse on the chip, the GPU itself, is really draining a minimal amount of power. And these CPUs, basically, when you don't need them, you can just shut them off and don't use them on the chip. So it means that with a large workload you would shut down the CPUs and just use the GPUs on the chip and just use 2 watts of power for significant workloads. So that was a very interesting result we had, and we wanted to go beyond this and try the new. So sorry, some conclusions before. So power consumption can be tuned depending on the required compute power you need. So basically, we have this power management modes that you can select, that will adjust the clock frequency on your processors and give you the ability to shut down part of the processor, be it the ARM cores or the GPU. So on the first generation of board, we measured power consumption between 2 watts and 7 watts, and in managed performance mode, the GPU only drains 2 watts, while the CPU will drain most of the power, and we believe we don't really need to use them. And in managed performance, we can get an average performance of around 3 watts. With decent compute performance, it means 30% less, sorry, there is a mistake here, so it's 70% of peak perf, or 30% less than peak performance. So the newest generation of these boards, they are quite more sophisticated chips. In fact, on the same chip, you have a cluster of ARM CPUs that are interconnected through some kind of custom fabric to GPUs, GPU cores. Sorry, and these two components of the system, so the CPU cluster and the GPU, they both share the same memory. So it means that you can exchange a lot of data between these cores depending on what kind of workload you have. It means also you can use a lot of libraries for data acquisition, etc., that are already available on the market, and then run your workload on the GPU pretty transparently. So these new boards, they come as a module, so it's a Minicom module, so it's the size of a credit card basically, and you can implement it on some carrier boards. So here I showed you the development kit, which is a pretty large development board, because you know when you do some basic tests in the lab, you don't want you want to have space around you, but of course the real chip is only this credit card size module. And of course you can put this on a different kind of carrier board. So here you have another view of the development kit where you have a lot of space, but you can implement everything on this kind of carrier board. This is the main connector which connects the GPU module here to all the peripherals you would like to use. And there are a lot of carrier boards available that you can optimize depending on the kind of I/O requirements you would have. So what happens in terms of power consumption with this new board? Well, we tested a number of workloads on this board to assess what was exactly the source of power draining you would have on these processors. And we tested very different kind of workloads. The first one, so just as the context, in my lab we are working in adaptive optics, which is a bit different than some things you do in space, but we used this whole pipeline because it contains a lot of different workloads to assess the performance of the processor. So one of the main pipeline in adaptive optics is to do a very large matrix vector multiply. And this kind of workload is memory bound. So the arithmetic intensity is rather low for this kind of workload. So it means you load a lot of data from memory to do your computations. So you will use a lot the memory on board. And as you may know, in modern computers, memory has become the most power draining part of a processor. So as expected, when we do a very intensive memory bound workload on the GPU, we get rather high power consumption, about 8 watts. So this is the new generation. Of course, we get a lot more computing power, but this kind of workload really drains a lot of power from the chip. When we go to another kind of workload, which is image centroiding, so here you have data transfer to memory, and then a memory bound application. You reduce this number to 6 watts, because half of what you are doing is accessing the memory, and the other half is just performing a standard code. So depending on the workload you have and the amount of memory transfer you are using in your workload, you see very different power consumption level. And if you go to a custom kernel, which is mainly compute bound, you are not accessing a lot the memory, then it goes down below 4 watts, more or less in a more or less stable manner. So it really shows that accessing memory can be a killer for your power consumption. Then to go beyond, we wanted to connect this component. So again, credit card size component to an actual high precision camera. So this camera is to be used in the lab and not to go in flight, but still it's useful because it uses a standard interface, gigabit Ethernet. So it's easy to connect. All the libraries are available, so you don't need to develop a single line of code to get an image from this camera to your device. And so we have assessed the power consumption, but also the compute performance and the time determinism of this compute performance. So more details on our setup. So we have our two components, the camera, the module, and again our power consumption meter, let's say, in the lab. And we are using here a carrier board that is highly optimized. You see it's the same size of the module. Of course, we are in the lab, so we can dissipate the heat and avoid burning the component, because we want to have fun. So yeah, that's it for this slide. So what happens in terms of power consumption when you connect the camera and try to get some images from it? So you see some transient effects, of course, that we cannot really explain today, but they are not a killer because they are very transient, and as soon as all the connections have been made, then your power consumption remains very stable and below the 4 watt limits we have fixed. And you see here the evolution between connecting to the network, because of course we use this component through the network. So first we lose a lot of, 40% of power by connecting to the network, and then we converge to about a 4 watt level when we connect the camera and start acquiring some frames. So this is good enough behavior for us. So what happens now if you do data acquisition from the camera and online processing in real time? And this is the kind of power curves you have. And you see that even though you have some spikes that go beyond this 4 watt limit we have, you still remain in a regime where you have this limited power consumption. So of course for us it's a very interesting result. It means that this module, so at the beginning we are starting up the platform, and you see that you have some transient effects, but this is highly reproducible. Every time we start the device we get more or less the same pattern in terms of energy consumption, and then it remains very stable between 4 and between 4 and 6 watts. Yes, so an average of about 5 watts, which is totally acceptable. So here the pipeline we have just acquire data from a camera, then process it following an adaptive optics typical pipeline. So image centroiding and a matrix vector multiply. So we had this memory band problem, but in average we remain below this 6 watts. So this new result on this new chip, it's a more complex chip. We have a cluster of ARM CPUs on board, and so we have access to more power management modes. So it means that in the future, depending on the pipeline, we will be able to adjust precisely the power management mode to the exact pipeline we are running on the chip. In terms of power consumption, we get between 2 and 8 watt with an average of 4-5 watt. But of course, this will depend on the power management mode we have chosen, and of course on the compute load. The CPU is still the component that drains most of the power, so just shut it down if you don't need to use it. And most importantly, the compute performance on this device has increased significantly as compared to the previous generation of boards. So basically you get the same power consumption, but a lot more computing power. And we have tested the full pipeline, including data acquisition and online processing, and this was a real-time pipeline with a response time in the range of about 10 milliseconds. So the processor is quite fast for this workload. So in terms of stability, what is the kind of processing time you would get on a pipeline? So this is the typical graph you get. So most of the iterations of our pipeline have a very constant computing time, and you have some jitter sometimes. But I don't know if you see the scale, but this is 6.5 milliseconds and goes up to 8 milliseconds. So you have a jitter of about 20% from time to time, and we believe that this is due to the interaction between the CPUs and the GPU on the chip. So you can significantly reduce this if you just shut down your CPUs. So we make this test with various power management modes, and you get, of course, different performance. When you get to the high performance mode, so of course the power consumption will increase, but the computing time significantly go down to 2 milliseconds. So we are 3 times more efficient, and the jitter here is of the order of a few percent. So in a maximum performance mode, the chip behaves as we expect. delivering a lot of computing power, but at the cost of power consumption, of course. Okay, so just to mention it, but I have no explanation today for this, but we see some very transient effects on the chip. So, you know, it's maybe not as reliable and stable in terms of compute performance as the kind of GPUs we are using in the lab, where you see at some point the computing time just drops and remains stable for the rest of the simulation. So this is weird. We are trying to investigate this today. So as I said, just one slide on what we are doing in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, we are using, you know, standard GPUs to build a pilot data processing center in Hanoi. We are targeting several applications for that. Image deblurring on the satellite. We are also doing some climate simulations to compare to satellite imaging for data analysis, and we are contemplating more applications in Vietnam. But also, if you have some ideas, we are happy to collaborate. What has been tough in this country is the access to new generation hardware, especially for embedded device. So we decided to concentrate on this pilot data processing center there. So that could be an issue when you go to this kind of countries and you want to access new generation hardware. You have to know that it's not always very easy in some countries. So future work, we are really interested in this time deterministic performance of the chip, because it can be used for real-time control of the satellite, so it would be very useful, a lot of computing power available for a very low power consumption. We are also looking for ways to optimize the power consumption for given data pipelines through these power management modes. And we are happy to receive new ideas for new pipelines that we could test and provide, you know, power curves for these pipelines. We want to lead a campaign of radiation tests to evaluate the resilience of the processor in realistic conditions. But it's a complex chip with a CPU cluster and a GPU cores. So we have to elaborate a dedicated test procedure for this, and this is not trivial. We also want to integrate, in the light of the results of this campaign, we want to integrate error mitigation technique in our pipeline and check the impact on performance and power consumption, and we plan to collaborate with CNES on this. We also want to work on the physical integration of the component inside a satellite platform. Could be a nano or micro satellite, or maybe a larger satellite. And one challenge for us is to follow up on the technology, because new chips hit the market every year or every 2 years, and we don't know how far we will be able to follow on the technology evolution. But since these chips, they are now developed for real industry, for instance, automotive or aeronautics, we are pretty sure that if we select one chip, we can have a long-term maintenance and long-term availability of this chip for maybe 10 or 20 years, because these industries, this is what they need. So we can benefit on this, and if at some point we choose to one dedicated chip, we know we can work with it for at least 10 years. I think that's it for me. Yes, that was my last slide.
So, thank you. So, questions?
Hello, Damien. A question of proper interest. You tested the GPU in the vacuum chamber for thermal tests.
Yes.
And to what temperature you went, and did it shut down in safe mode? Because you said it works without fan in safe mode, but when you put up the temperature, does it shut down anyway?
No, it didn't shut down. It
Well,
did work up to 50 degrees, I think.
Okay, so for space applications, you might not need any cooling system in nanosat.
No, yes, nothing fancy. You know,
Okay.
maybe a dissipator, very not fancy.
Okay.
But you wouldn't get the highest performance with your chip.
Thank you.
Another question? Pour le test en température, la cartographie que vous avez essayé de faire de votre système, j'ai cru voir des petits capteurs de température un peu à droite à gauche. Vous n'avez pas essayé d'utiliser une caméra thermique et au pire faire un zoom sur le CPU, sur le socle lui-même pour essayer de voir qu'est-ce qui s'allume en fonction de votre traitement. Et juste un petit commentaire, je trouve la présentation bien, mais j'aurais bien voulu voir un transparent avec un benchmark, en gros avec un processeur spatialisable et qu'est-ce qu'il est capable de faire comme performance et consommation et ce que vous auriez pu attendre avec ces circuits. Pour la première question.
Deux très bonnes remarques. Pour la première, ça aurait été bien d'avoir une caméra thermique. On n'a pas fait ce test-là. Should I do it in English or? Yeah. So you were asking about the use of thermal camera to spot where the heat was coming from on the component itself. So we didn't do this test, but I think it's very interesting, so we'll consider this in the future. And your second question was about a benchmark comparing this component to components that are already available for space missions, such as the Leon processor, for instance. So we didn't do that yet, but hopefully if this collaboration with CNES starts next year, I think we'll have the ability to do that. Maybe not with the Leon processor, but the next generation of processors that are being considered for space.
Actually, I have one question. Regarding the benchmarking, do you plan to use something like the Jericho's bench that is already available in the Observatory of Paris? So it's like a bench to test algorithms with simulated hardware. So I don't know if you plan to simulate the GPU in this kind of bench, or?
We have no plans like this.
Okay.
Since we already have the hardware, so
yeah, right. Okay.
For us,
yeah,
it's quite easy to implement new pipelines because the programming model is standard C, and so basically, if you have a C code, we can run it on the platform. Okay. So we can.
So no need to simulate because you have it. Yeah, right. No other questions? Okay.
Okay, so we will do the last presentation of the morning by Amandine Denis on the experience return of QB50.
Good morning again, everybody. So I will tell you about the QB50 project. The QB50 project is all about international collaboration with the objective to investigate the mid and lower thermosphere. So it is a real scientific mission, but with a very international characteristic. The QB50 project is mainly more than 50 teams all around the world, university or research institute teams, developing CubeSats. And these teams are supported by a consortium of 15 partners. And this consortium is led by the Von Karman Institute in Belgium. This is a project funded by the European Commission. So QB50 has 4 main objectives. The first one was to provide and to improve the access to space for small-scale research and maybe planetary exploration. That was not an easy objective to achieve, as you will see. Then QB50 has a real strong scientific objective to investigate the chemical composition of the mid and lower thermosphere. I will tell you more about that. And the objective is twofold, scientific and also technological objective, because QB50 provided a platform for in-orbit demonstration of some technologies, such as formation flying, ablation study, drag sail, and propulsion. And then QB50 has an educational objective, because Many students have been involved, and QB50 was the first CubeSat project for many teams. So first, the science. Why are we studying the mid and lower thermosphere, and why with CubeSat? The thermosphere is maybe the less known layer of the atmosphere. It is often called the ignorosphere. It is really at the edge of space. It is a bit too low to reach by big satellites, or at least too low to stay there for a long time, or it will be very expensive. But it is too high for rockets and radars. You can go there with sounding rockets, but you can only spend there a few minutes. So CubeSats are really an interesting tool for that, because you launch them around 400 kilometers, and then they will go down over a year, down to 200 kilometers. So you will be really scanning this layer of the atmosphere. CubeSats are cheap, expandable, so that's a nice tool to do science up there. And of course, there's no space debris generated because the CubeSats will completely burn when re-entering. So this is an educational project, and I think and I hope that the QB50 teams learn a lot through the process. It was for them a process of almost 6 years, from design, then manufacturing and assembly. From the VKI side, we try to support them, to provide them with tools they can use to develop their project. We try to provide guidance, advice, good practice, and we held several reviews like PDR, CDR, assembly and test readiness review, ground station readiness review, flight readiness review. We tried to make it a good example of a real space project for them. And we come to the access to space. You maybe know that it was not so easy for QB50 to find the final launchers. We had to investigate several options, and in the end we managed to deploy 36 CubeSats into space. Not 50, not all of them could made it until the end, unfortunately, but at least 36 did it. 28 have been launched from the International Space Station. They were launched by an Atlas V rocket from Florida in mid-April and deployed from the space station in May this year. And 2 weeks ago, we had the second launch for QB50 with an Indian rocket, and 8 CubeSats have been deployed in orbit. The two orbits, so the one for the ISS CubeSats and the one for the PSLV CubeSats, are really complementary because one is rather low, so it's immediately in the region of interest, but it doesn't cover the poles for the ISS orbit. Then the PSLV orbit covers the poles. It's a bit higher, but CubeSats will finally go down anyway, and we have from a scientific point of view, it was really interesting to fly over the pole. The ISS launch is a bit of a specific process. I don't know if some of you have experience with it. So the CubeSat at first to go through a safety review. They were reviewed by NASA. We were supported by NanoRacks in this process. And then the CubeSats were integrated in the deployers, but we did it in Europe for QB50. We centralized the integration in the deployers at ISIS facilities in the Netherlands. That was done with the support of the NanoRacks team. Then the CubeSats in their deployers were shipped to Houston, where they have been processed as the normal cargo going to the ISS. So they have been stored and then integrated in the Cygnus cargo. And the Cygnus has been launched by Atlas V in April, docked to the ISS, and when it is time to launch, or a few days before, the astronauts take the deployers, attach them on a sliding table. The table is moved out of the station through an airlock, and then the Japanese robotic arm grabbed the deployers and put them in the right position to deploy. And then the deploy signal is given by ground teams, and they open the deployers one by one, and there is at least 3 hours in between. So it took a few days for the first batch, and then the following week, again, a few days to deploy all QB50 CubeSats from the ISS. The good thing is that when astronauts are awake, they take beautiful pictures. So these are real pictures of the QB50 CubeSats being launched from the ISS. You can see the deployers, the NanoRacks deployers. So they packed 12 of them, and each of them can accommodate 6 units. So we had between 1 and 3 QB50 CubeSats, depending on their size. The PSLV launch took place 2 weeks ago. That's more classical launch. It was coordinated by ISIS. You can see the rocket lifting off and the CubeSat deployment. There's small CubeSat over there. I don't know which CubeSat it is. It could be a QB50, but it could not be. A few words about the science. So for reaching the scientific mission of QB50, we gave the teams an instrument. So all QB50 CubeSats have one of these 3 instruments. They all focus on the chemical components of the thermosphere. You have an ion and neutral mass spectrometers, you have flux probe experiment, and multi-needle Langmuir probes. They will give detailed knowledge of the chemical composition of the thermosphere, and distributing these sensors over the constellation really have an interest in space and time resolution of the measurements. You can decide to measure simultaneously, then at different places, or you can decide to measure over the same place, but at different point in time then, and that can give really interesting scientific data. Each instrument will take measurement for about 60 days. It's 60 non-consecutive days. You will have a first campaign of 2 months where the CubeSats are supposed to take measurements 1 every other day. And then there is a free period where the CubeSats are free to run their own experiment. If they wish, they are also free to run the QB50 experiment, but we also want to give the team the time to run their own experiment that they might have on board. And then when the constellation is below 300 kilometers, that's again a region of interest for us. So again, they go for 2 months when they operate 1 every other day. Again, if they want to measure every day, they are free to do it, but they have time to run their own experiment. So that's the family picture of QB50, because you can see all 3 instruments in space. Again, no Photoshop, real picture taken by the astronaut. You can see the INMS, the MNLP here. The probes are not yet deployed because it's right after ejection from the space station, and the FIPEX instrument there. So yeah, that was very cool for the team also to see their CubeSat in space. Why do we study the thermosphere? Because it's, I told you, a region that it is not very well known, so the modeling of that region is not very good, that it will help improving the model and the understanding of the phenomena happening there. It has consequences on the re-entry. It could be the re-entry of debris, but also the re-entry of satellites, of spacecraft. It can also improve lifetime prediction and improve the planning for maneuvers, for station keeping, for example, for the ISS, or for collision avoidance. So, I guess your main question now is what's the status? Are these CubeSats working? So for the ISS, that's the status as of today, or let's say yesterday. You can see that our 28 CubeSats are already well spread over the orbit. I think it's already more than half of the orbit covered by the CubeSats. And just after launch, just after deployment, 20 out of 28 were working fine. Then 2 went silent after a few days, a few weeks. That's Greece, O2, and Finland. For now, we don't hear them anymore, but there is hope that the orbital plane is shifting slightly, and they will get a better orbit in terms of power budget, so they could come back. And the interesting story is that AU02, AU03, so 2 Australian satellites, and AZ01, a South African satellite, they were all silent after deployment. Nobody heard them, but they did not give up. And with the help of radio amateurs and a big dish from a radio telescope in the Netherlands, they managed to send comment and to have the CubeSats working now. So AU02, AU03 are now working well. The parameters are quite good. And EZ01, the news just came 2 days ago that they have Earth their satellite. So it is transmitting very weak signals, showing that the antennas are still stowed inside, and that something went wrong with the power management, so it is consuming too much power. So for now, they are trying to improve the power management and to deploy the antennas. But we have more and more CubeSats alive. That's really good. Most of them are busy with the commissioning of the platform. They are mainly focusing on the ADCS now. And 4, maybe now, as of today, 5, have already started to commission the sensor unit and to transmit the first science data, just to make sure the science unit is working properly. For the PSLV, we don't have yet the exact TLEs for all of them, so I can only show you the position of all objects that were deployed by the launch. And the QB50 CubeSats are somewhere here. Out of the 8 CubeSats launched by the PSLV, 7 are alive, which is also a very good score. One has already deployed is drag sail, so inflate sail. It was an in-orbit demonstrator. It doesn't carry a scientific instrument, but wanted to deploy a drag sail, and this has been done successfully already last week, so that's already a full success for inflate sail. For now, we are still busy with discrimination, trying to see which TLE is matching with CubeSat, and commissioning. A few lessons learned. First is the radio amateurs, and these are really people we would like to thank from QB50 and also from all the teams, I think. They have been very enthusiastic and very supportive to the project. They have, from the first day, the first hour already, they were following us and listening to the CubeSats. And as was said during the ISIS presentation, we received signal like half an hour after deployment. The first signal were already reported, and we received a lot of support from all around the world, including Japan, US, South Africa. And they are really motivated and enthusiastic about the project. This is a picture that a radio amateur did, and you can see there nearly all of the QB50 CubeSats launched by the ISS. That's a waterfall plot, so you can see them along frequency and time. So that was really nice, and it is still really nice to have their support. A few words also on the discrimination, so matching the TLE with the CubeSat. It was not easy, it's not immediately done. We have first preliminary TLEs around 1 week after deployment, and then it still takes time to match them with the CubeSat, and also in that process we were really well supported by the radio amateur. Second lessons learned about the radio amateur, as I told you, the Australian CubeSats were not working at all after deployment, at least they were not heard, but they could use a huge 25-meter radio telescope in the Netherlands to listen to the signal. And then the hypothesis was that the antenna were not deployed, so they sent comments, and they were able to deploy the antennas, and now the signals are received. And the CubeSats are working well. So lessons learned, never give up. Don't give up after 2 days, 3 days, 1 week. For the South African satellite, it was nearly 2 months, more than 1 month after launch that they received the first signal. So never give up, and have an engineering model in the lab so that you can test your procedure and the comment that you would like to send and the scenario you are investigating. So that's very important to keep spare hardware in the lab, and if possible, really a copy of the satellite you are launching. Another lesson learned, test everything, every single component, even if they are cuts, even if they are provided by someone else. Don't make any assumption, test it. That's the story of the South Korean satellite, active, responsive, working fine, and then came the time to commission the ADCS. They just started, and then they wanted to deploy the magnetometer that is supposed to deploy. You can see it here. It's not essential to have it. I'm sure they will succeed in their mission without it, but when they tried to deploy it, they did not manage to deploy it in space. And investigating a bit, it could be that the cables are too short to make it possible to deploy. It was provided in the Stout configuration with the instruction, do not deploy it before space because you cannot refurbish it. But then you never know if it can deploy or not in the way you assemble it. So make sure you can test everything and every deployable. And especially for deployable, test the deployment under vacuum. Also from the antennas. Most of the CubeSats that are dead on arrival, the main hypothesis is that the antennas did not deploy, because the way your antenna deploy and the way your thermal knife will be working is very different under ambient condition or vacuum condition. That's important to test all deployables under vacuum and at low and high temperature. Small lesson learned from QB50. Test everything and never trust the data sheet. Just a few conclusions to emphasize it is the first international collaboration to develop a real constellation. It's not a constellation of identical satellites. Each team was free to develop their own satellite. They just had to carry the sensor unit and to respect a few specifications. But each satellite is really different, and that's the first. That's also the first long duration in situ exploration of the thermosphere. And we have hoped to have very valuable scientific data from that. In total, we have now 36 CubeSats for 34 instruments. It could be that a few latecomers might still fly this year and could still contribute a bit to the mission. The teams were coming from 5 continents, 16 different countries. It's not always easy, but it's very enriching to see the cultural background and the difference of handling a space project according to where you come from. I think we had much more than 50 professors and 300 students involved. The budget from the European Commission is 9 million euros. That's much less than what would cost 50 classical satellites. And we read and reviewed more than 10,000 pages of documentation. I promised we read them all. A family picture of the ISS CubeSat. They are all in the NanoRacks deployer already. We are looking at them through the access panel when they were ready for space. For us, it has been a very interesting experience. We learn a lot at QB50 team, and it's really a teamwork. Last slide, I will leave that one on the screen. You are all invited to join on the 9th European CubeSat Symposium that will take place end of this year in November, December at the Belgian seaside in Ostend. Come, present your result. There will be, every year we see many people coming from all around the world. The QB50 teams will be there as well. And this year it is co-located with the Space Weather Week, so you can access both conferences with paying only one registration. So if you're interested in space weather, that's also a good place to be. And that's also more people to see your presentation and to get interested in your project. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you and congratulations to all your team for this wonderful launch of a myriad of nanosat. So questions?
I don't know if you say it, but what is please the average duration in orbit before re-entry of these satellites?
For the ISS CubeSat, it will be around 1 year.
1 year. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe 5 years for the Indian launcher.
Have you planned to launch the 14 CubeSat that actually didn't go?
So, unfortunately, the QB50 project is ending. I mean, the grant for the European Commission is ending at some point by the end of the year. We facilitated the contact between the remaining teams and NanoRacks so that they can get easier access to space, but we cannot support them as we supported the main batch of CubeSat. Still, we are following them. We will advise as much as possible, and they could fly by the end of the year or early next year.
That means the project ended with FP7 funds. You did not propose something for H2020?
Some proposals are going on mainly focused on the scientific results, but nothing confirmed yet.
Okay.
Okay, last question. No? Okay, so thank you again.